She knocked on his door with trembling hands, asking only for bread. He gave it without hesitation. The next morning, 200 soldiers stood silently outside his barn, each carrying a story, a scar and a question no one else dared to ask. What had he done to bring them here? And what did they come for? If stories of quiet courage, unexpected kindness, and the miracles born from simple acts move you, you're in the right place. Subscribe now and join a growing community that believes in second chances, healing hearts, and the power of one open door. Now, let me tell you what really happened inside that barn. The thunder of helicopters shattered the silence above the Colorado plains. Floodlights swept across the darkened landscape, illuminating the modest barn nestled at the edge of Holden Cole's property. Dust rose in thick waves as military Humvees groaned to a halt, forming a semicircle around the barn, like the tightening noose of a silent execution. Holden stood in the doorway, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sweat beading along his brow despite the late hour. One arm stretched protectively behind him, shielding the woman crouched in the shadows of the hay bales. His other hand gripped the doorframe, not to steady his body, but to ground the storm inside his chest. The woman, frail, dirt-smeared, her military uniform torn and stained, held her breath, her back pressed against the barn wall. Her eyes wild with fear, and something deeper locked on the little girl at Holden's side. Ellie. Just 10 years old, her hand clutched her father's, and in her other arm, she hugged the old stuffed bear that once belonged to her baby brother, a quiet, constant reminder of all they'd lost. Mr. Cole, a voice boomed from the loudspeaker atop the central Humvee. You are harboring a fugitive. This is your final warning. Step outside unarmed and surrender Captain Lily Harlow, or we will enter by force. Holden didn't move. Behind him, Lily's breath caught. She whispered, "They'll shoot you." He turned his head slightly, just enough for his voice to reach her, without losing sight of the armed perimeter tightening around them. They'll have to go through a father first. The wind rustled the wheatgrass in the fields. The moment held like stretched wire, just waiting for the snap. But the snap never came. Not yet. Instead, darkness. The floodlights cut out. The choppers stilled, hovering like beasts on invisible chains. Then came the quiet. Holden could almost hear his own heartbeat. And with that silence, his mind flew backward, not minutes, but hours, to the moment that had started it all. It was late afternoon when Holden saw her, just a shape at first, stumbling across the far edge of his property, near the old fence, where coyotes sometimes gathered at dusk. He was elbow-deep in engine oil fixing the busted tractor axle when something in the air shifted. A flicker of movement in the distance, barely more than a shimmer in the heat. Wiping his hands on an old rag, Holden stood up and squinted. At first he thought it was a mirage, too skinny, too slow to be anything but a deer, half-starved or dying. But then it staggered sideways and fell to its knees. Human. Without a word, he grabbed the canteen from the fence post and jogged toward her. When he reached her, she was on all fours, her breathing ragged lips cracked. Her dog tags hung loosely from her collar, but the name was hidden beneath layers of grime. Her eyes, sunken, yet fierce, locked onto his. She didn't say help. She didn't say please. She said, "Don't shoot." Holden knelt slowly, canteen in hand, arms wide open. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the only thing I shoot out here is rattlesnakes." He uncapped the canteen and held it to her lips. She drank like a creature reborn. Then her hand clutched his wrist, not with fear, but desperation. "I haven't eaten in 3 days," she whispered. "And I've walked 20 miles, following the smell of bread." Holden stared at her, stunned. "My daughter baked this morning," he muttered. That's how she ended up in his barn, curled in the old rocking chair under his late wife's quilt, spooning leftover soup into her mouth with trembling hands. Ellie watched her from the doorway with wide, unblinking eyes. She wasn't afraid, just curious, the way only a child who's seen real grief can be. After dinner, Holden offered her a place in the guest room, but she refused. Said the rocking chair was fine. Said the rhythm helped her sleep. So she slept, and he sat at the kitchen table staring at the old photo of his wife and son, the only two faces that still lived inside his memory with clarity. He traced the edge of the frame, whispered a silent prayer, and read once more the last letter his wife had written before the fever took her. If ever someone knocks on our door, hungry, don't ask where they came from. Just feed them. The world is full of wounded people. Maybe one day we'll feed someone who helps heal us too. That night, Holden didn't know who she was, but he knew what she wasn't dangerous. Back in the present, Holden squinted into the night. A single figure emerged from the main Humvee, tall, rigid, decorated with ribbons and medals. Colonel Miles Redford. He stepped forward, bullhorn in hand, face lit by the headlights. He didn't yell this time. He spoke like a man torn between duty and doubt. Mr. Cole, we don't want blood, but this woman, Captain Lily Harlow, is wanted for desertion, data theft, and endangering national security. Holden didn't flinch. She was starving, he said, voice clear and afraid and broken. Redford paused. You knew who she was. I knew she was human. Behind him, Lily stepped into view. Her hair was tangled, her knees still shook, but her voice when it came was like steel wrapped in grief. Colonel Redford, she said loud enough for the wind to carry it, I have proof of everything. The truth they buried. I didn't run, I exposed what they didn't want anyone to see. In the shadows, Ellie reached up and took her father's hand. Holden breathed in the dry air of the plains, the weight of 100 rifles pointed at his chest. Then he stepped forward. You're going to have to decide something tonight, he said, eyes on Redford. Whether justice means silence or courage. The lights flared back on, the rifles rose, and the barn held its breath. The following afternoon had been brutally hot, the kind of heat that clings to your back and makes even the trees stop rustling. Holden Cole was halfway under his rusted Massey Ferguson tractor, trying to pry loose a stubborn axle bolt, when he caught a shimmer of movement near the tree line. He stilled. At first it looked like a deer, maybe sick or lame, the way it staggered out of the sagebrush and onto the brittle grass. But then it veered sharply, almost fell, and straightened again. Too unsteady, too slow, and too upright. Human. Holden rolled out from under the tractor, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better years. He narrowed his eyes against the sun. Whoever it was had no business walking across his property in that condition, if it could even be called walking. The figure, female by her shape, dragged her left leg behind her. She wore what looked like the remains of military fatigues, though caked in dust and torn in places that revealed scraped, sunburnt skin. Her boots were untied, mismatched socks rolled down at the ankles, and one arm hung limply as if it had long since given up holding anything. Holden's gut twisted. He'd seen that walk before. Kandahar, 2008. A young Marine named Travis had walked like that after surviving 2 days in a ditch, half dead, holding pressure to a fellow soldier's artery with his own hands. He reached for the canteen tied to the fence post and started toward her, slow and cautious hands visible. She collapsed to her knees a few feet from the fence line. Dust billowed around her like smoke from a fire. As he approached, she raised one hand in a trembling warning. "Don't shoot," she rasped. Holden stopped short. Her lips were cracked, her eyes sunken but defiant. "I'm not here to steal. She drew a shallow breath. I just followed the smell of bread. That stopped him cold. Bread. Ellie had been baking that morning banana cornbread using her mother's old recipe. The scent had wafted through the open windows and across the fields like a ribbon of memory. It had been strong enough to pull Holden back into his own childhood for a minute. And now, this woman, sunburned and broken, had followed it like a lifeline. He crouched, uncapped the canteen, and held it out. "I don't shoot people who follow the smell of bread," he said. She drank in greedy gulps, coughing once then again. Her hand clutched his forearm not for support, but like an anchor. 3 days, she murmured. No food. Not since. I lost the last safe house. Holden didn't ask what that meant. The look in her eyes told him enough. She wasn't a drifter. She wasn't high. She wasn't lost in the way the world defines it. She was fleeing something or someone with more purpose than her body could keep up with. "Name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Then Lily. "Last name." "Later," she whispered. Holden helped her to her feet gently, like he might a newborn calf. She leaned against him but didn't resist. Her body was burning with heat and trembling with cold. He could feel it through his shirt as he guided her toward the barn. Ellie met them at the back door. The girl had her mother's wide green eyes and Holden's quiet strength. She tilted her head at Lily, then looked up at her father. "She hungry?" "Yeah." Ellie nodded, once turned around and disappeared into the kitchen. Inside the cabin, Holden guided Lily to the rocking chair that still held a cushion with faded sunflowers. It was his wife's favorite seat. He didn't question why he put her there. He just did. While Lily sat in silence, Holden reheated the last of the bean soup from lunch. Ellie returned with 2 thick slices of banana cornbread arranged carefully on a plate. She set them on the table beside Lily and stepped back without a word. Lily's hand shook as she picked up the spoon. She ate like someone trying not to cry, and maybe she was. Halfway through the second bowl, she paused and looked at Holden. "Why didn't you ask more questions?" Holden shrugged. "Questions can wait. Hunger can't." She studied him for a long second, as if she were trying to decide if that answer was sincere or just convenient. Eventually, she nodded more to herself than to him and finished the soup. Later that evening, after Ellie had gone to bed and Lily had dozed off in the rocking chair, Holden stood alone at the kitchen sink. He washed the spoon she'd used slowly, running his thumb over the grooves in the worn wood handle. His gaze drifted to the shelf above the sink. There sat the photo, faded and creased, of his wife and son, taken 3 months before the outbreak that took both of them. Ellie had survived. Barely. Next to the photo, tucked into a ceramic jar, was the letter. He unfolded it like a prayer. "If one day you feel too broken to love again, bake something. Love rises like dough. And if someone hungry knocks on our door, feed them. The world needs more people who feed strangers without asking why they're hungry." Holden glanced at the woman sleeping beneath the patchwork quilt, the one his wife had sewn the summer before the diagnosis. He exhaled through his nose and turned off the light. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere too far to see trouble was already on its way. The wind howled through the trees that night, brushing dry branches against the barn's wooden siding, like the whispers of ghosts, too tired to speak plainly. Inside, the old rocking chair creaked gently beneath Lily's sleeping form. Her face, though still worn and pale, had softened less like a fugitive and more like someone who had finally outrun her own shadow. Holden stood by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the grass in pale ribbons. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, tired, bearded brow furrowed deeper than it had been even a year ago. Grief ages a man faster than war ever could. Ellie's room was quiet. He'd tucked her in hours earlier, the way he always did, with a soft song his wife used to hum and a promise that no storm would get past the barn. She never asked for bedtime stories anymore, not since her little brother passed. Not since the world reminded her far too young that even happy endings came with disclaimers. Holden turned away from the window and sat at the kitchen table, the floor groaning beneath his boots. In the soft glow of the oil lamp, he reached for the ceramic jar with the chipped rim, the one labeled sugar, though no sugar had sat inside it for years. He pulled out the folded letter. It was yellowed. Now the ink a little faded, but he'd memorized every word long before the first smudge appeared. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But you're not. That's what matters. You were always the one who stayed calm when things fell apart. Promise me you'll keep the barn open. Don't close the door to the world just because the world hurt you. Someone will need it someday. Someone will knock, and they'll need more than food. They'll need you, Holden. And maybe, just maybe, you'll need them too. The words had once been too much to read without choking. Now they settled over him like a second skin, a weight he'd come to accept. Across the room, Lily shifted in her sleep. A soft, broken sound escaped her lips, not quite a sob, not quite a word. The quilt slid off her shoulder, and Holden stepped over instinctively to cover her again. He hesitated. Her dog tags had slipped free from under her collar, catching the light just enough for him to read the engraved name, Harlow L.E. Blood Type O+ U.S. Army. There was something about seeing it laid bare, a name, a life that made her real in a different way. Not just a stranger in distress, a soldier, a woman. Someone who had stood in the same boots he once had, though perhaps on a different battlefield. Holden returned to the table and stared at the folded letter in his hands. Then he whispered to no one in particular. "Well, darlin', looks like someone knocked." At first light, Lily stirred, blinking against the sunlight leaking through the cracks in the barn wall. She looked around, disoriented for half a breath, until the smell of frying eggs and coffee pulled her toward the kitchen. Holden was already at the stove, spatula in one hand, pouring batter into an old cast-iron skillet with the other. "You look more like a person today," he said, without turning around. "That makes one of us," Lily muttered. Holden chuckled. Ellie, already dressed in a hand-me-down denim jacket, sat at the table drawing something on the back of an envelope, a rough sketch of a horse with angel wings. She looked up at Lily and offered a shy wave. "Morning," Lily said, voice scratchy. "Hi," Ellie replied. "You were talking in your sleep." Lily froze. Said something about coordinates and wrong side of the ridge. Ellie shrugged. I didn't understand it, but it sounded important. Lily lowered herself into the chair across from the girl and rubbed her temples. "Sometimes dreams carry ghosts," she murmured. "We keep 'em in the barn," Ellie said casually. "There's plenty of space." Holden set a plate down in front of Lily. Pancakes, bacon, 2 eggs over medium. It looked like a meal from another life. She blinked. "That's too much. You didn't eat for 3 days. You'll manage?" "I didn't come here to be anyone's charity case." Holden raised an eyebrow. "You didn't come here, remember? You collapsed in my field." Lily looked away, her pride clearly bruised but not broken. She reached for the fork. Her hand was steadier than yesterday. It wasn't much, but it was something. Halfway through breakfast, Holden asked the question that had lingered all night. "Are you running from something or toward something?" Lily chewed slowly. Then she put her fork down. "Both." Holden waited. "I was stationed with a covert unit in Nevada," she said. 2 months ago, I uncovered a set of encrypted files that weren't meant to be seen, orders to cover up a civilian strike gone wrong. It wasn't an accident. It was a choice." Her voice hardened. "They erased entire families to protect a pipeline route. You tried to report it. Chain of command was compromised. Every door I knocked on just led to another hallway full of silence. So I copied the files and ran. I thought I had time to get to the right people." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out time is the one thing you don't have when you're holding the truth." Holden folded his arms. "And now they've labeled me a traitor." Ellie stopped coloring. "You don't look like a bad guy," she said. Lily's eyes glistened. "I didn't want to be the kind of soldier who obeyed a command just because it came with stripes. I wanted to be the kind that asks questions, the kind that doesn't forget who's under the uniform." Silence fell thick as syrup. Holden finally broke it. "You can stay here tonight. But after that, we need to figure out what comes next." Lily nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't say you're welcome. He just handed her the last piece of cornbread from the tin and said, "It's my daughter's recipe. Her mama's, really. Women in this house have a way of feeding people who don't realize how hungry they are." Lily smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. And for the first time in weeks, maybe longer, she let herself believe that this wasn't the end. It might just be the beginning. The sun rose behind the Rockies, with a haze that promised another scorcher. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window, settling like gold dust across the worn wooden floor and faded tablecloth. It might have looked like a peaceful day if you didn't know better. But Holden Cole did. He stood barefoot at the sink, rinsing out the coffee pot. The quiet in the house felt loaded, now the way a room holds its breath right before a thunderclap. Lily's story from the night before still echoed in his head. Civilian strike, covered up, labeled a traitor. It didn't add up, and that's exactly what made it believable. Holden wasn't naive. He'd seen enough during his own deployment to know that honor wasn't always part of the chain of command. And yet, hiding someone wanted by the military, even for the right reasons, was the kind of thing that could get a man arrested, or worse. But it wasn't just about right or wrong anymore. It hadn't been since she fell into his field, mumbling about bread and betrayal. From the living room came the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair. Lily was awake, her eyes swollen from sleep, but alert. A soldier's kind of alert, like she hadn't stopped scanning the room even in her dreams. Ellie sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, showing her a photo album. She flipped pages, slowly narrating each picture in that quiet, matter-of-fact way only children possess. "That's my mom," Ellie pointed before the hospital made her hair fall out. "She's beautiful," Lily said softly. "She used to dance in the kitchen. I still remember the songs." Holden leaned against the doorway watching. It was strange how quickly Ellie had opened up to Lily. The girl had been closed off since the funeral, careful with strangers, guarded even with family. But something about Lily cracked that shell. Maybe it was because Lily didn't treat her like a child. Maybe because Ellie saw in her the same quiet grief she saw in her dad. Whatever it was real. And that made everything more dangerous. After breakfast, Holden stepped outside to split kindling. It wasn't cold enough for a fire, but the routine helped settle his nerves. The axe thudded into the stump with a familiar rhythm. Split. Stack. Repeat. He hadn't told Lily yet, but the news was changing fast. He'd picked up the emergency radio signal last night, Channel 3 military. Distorted but unmistakable. They were looking for her. More than that, they were closing in. He'd heard fragments, suspect maybe in Colorado. Last contact 36 hours ago. High priority retrieval. Retrieval. Not rescue. Not questioning. That was the part that chilled him most. When he returned to the house, Lily was standing in the hallway holding her duffel bag. Her lips were set in a tight line, and her eyes met his like she already knew what he was about to say. "I heard your radio. I didn't turn the volume up," he said. "Didn't need to," she tapped her ear. 6 years in recon. I know what a coded ping sounds like through static. Holden sighed, ran a hand through his hair. "They'll come, Lily. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But they'll come. Then I need to be gone before they do. I'm not putting you or your daughter in danger." Holden stared at her jaw tight. "You're already here. You think leaving now changes anything? If they find me here, this place becomes a target." "It already is." The words hung between them sharp and heavy. Ellie stepped into the hallway holding a drawing in her hand, Lily and herself standing in front of the barn, sunlight all around them. She looked from one adult to the other. "You're leaving." Lily knelt beside her. "Not yet." That afternoon, Holden sat in the barn's loft with Lily. Dust floated in the beams of light that slipped through the slats in the wall. He handed her a cup of water and said nothing for a long time. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out something small, her dog tags. "Found these on the floor this morning," he said, offering them to her. She froze. "You read the name. I didn't have to. I remembered it. From a story last year. The military called it minor misconduct during an intelligence review. But I remember thinking, that didn't sound minor." Lily took the tags, silently clenched them tight. "They made me disappear on paper before they ever tried to find me in person," she said. Holden nodded. "I know how that feels." She looked at him. "I left the Marines with a commendation and a letter of apology." Translation: "Thanks for shutting up about what you saw." "I didn't shut up. Just stopped talking to the wrong people." Lily exhaled, slow and shaky. "Why are you helping me?" Holden looked her dead in the eyes. "Because I'd want someone to do the same for Ellie if she ever told the truth and got punished for it." She blinked hard, and he turned away before the moment became too raw. That evening the barn was quiet again. Ellie curled up on the couch reading while Lily helped Holden slice vegetables for stew. It was domestic in the strangest, most dangerous way. But peace, no matter how brief, has a way of sneaking in through the back door until the dog barked. One sharp warning sound. Holden looked out the window. Dust, lots of it. Coming fast. A vehicle. 2. Maybe more. "We have company," he said. Lily's posture shifted instantly. Alert. Tensed. Military, maybe. Not marked. She reached for her duffel, zipped it. "I'll go out the back. Lead them away." "No." Holden grabbed his coat. "We don't run. Not until we know who they are." He looked at Ellie, who now stood silently by the door, barefoot and clutching her drawing. "Ellie, honey, go hide behind the hay bales. Quietly. Just like we practiced." She didn't ask why. She just obeyed. Holden stepped outside, heart hammering. Lily followed one step behind, and the dust cloud kept coming. Whatever was about to arrive would change everything. The dust hit first, an orange-brown curtain of grit that rolled in from the south like a storm without thunder. It coated the fence posts, churned up the dry grass, and rasped against Holden Cole's skin like sandpaper as he stepped onto the porch. He could see the shape of the vehicles now. Not civilian. Not quite military either. 2 matte black SUVs, wide tires, front grills reinforced. The kind of transport used for quiet operations, too quiet for news cameras, too loud to be legal. Holden's hand drifted unconsciously toward his side, where a holster used to sit before he'd locked it in the drawer 3 years ago and promised Ellie he wouldn't need it again. He kept his stance casual, but his eyes were sharp, measuring everything. The slow roll of the vehicles, the precision of their spacing, the synchronized way both stopped at the same moment. Lily stood behind him in the shadow of the doorway, her stance low weight balanced. She was breathing slowly, evenly, counting heartbeats like a soldier taught to expect betrayal. One SUV door creaked open, then another. From the driver's side of the lead vehicle, a man stepped out. Tall, mid-50s buzz-cut hair just beginning to gray at the temples. His uniform was plain clothes, but pressed to regulation perfection. Aviators covered his eyes, But Holden didn't need to see them to know this was a man used to being obeyed. And behind him, 2 more men. Fit. Silent. No insignia. No words. The leader approached slowly, boots crunching gravel. Holden stayed on the top step of the porch. "Mr. Cole," the man asked. His voice was polite, but every syllable carried authority like a sheathed blade. "That's me. I'm Colonel Miles Redford, tasked with recovery operations under Special Military Order 274B. He pulled out a leather folder, flashed an ID Holden didn't look at. Redford's gaze swept the property. "We received information that a fugitive of military interest may have sought shelter here." Holden tilted his head slightly. "You mean the woman who collapsed in my field, half dead, asking for water and bread?" Redford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Captain Lily Harlow is considered armed, unstable, and in possession of stolen classified material. If she's here, I strongly suggest you surrender her into custody." Quietly. Holden nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then he said, "She's inside, sitting down, eating stew." The 2 men behind Redford shifted. Redford took a step forward. "Then I'll ask again. Turn her over." No, the answer landed like a rock dropped into still water. Redford's brows arched just a little, as though amused. "You're protecting a deserter. I'm protecting a human being." A beat passed, long and charged. "And your daughter," Redford asked, voice suddenly softer. "She live here too?" Holden's shoulders stiffened. That wasn't a question. That was a threat, gift wrapped in velvet. From behind the porch beam, Lily stepped into view. "Don't touch the girl," she said, her voice low but clear. "This isn't her fight." Redford turned to her. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not surprise, but recognition. "You were always the loud one, Harlow," he said, "even when silence would have kept you alive. And you were always the one who smiled while signing the orders no one else wanted to touch." Redford took another step. "You're lucky I came in person. There are men behind me who'd rather not talk at all." "Then they're not soldiers," she said. "They're executioners." The tension broke like glass under boot. One of Redford's men reached toward his belt, maybe for a weapon, maybe a radio. It didn't matter. Holden stepped down from the porch, closing the distance in 2 strides. "Enough," he said, steel in his voice now. "This is my property. You want to talk? We talk. But if you lay one finger on my daughter, or raise one weapon near this barn, you'll find out real fast how little I have left to lose." Redford studied him for a long moment. Then, almost reluctantly, he raised a hand. His men stopped moving. "We're not here to make a scene," Redford said. "I'm here to offer a choice." To her, Holden asked. "To all of you." He glanced toward the barn, toward the girl who still clung to her childhood, in drawings and hand-me-down boots. "She's not in the fight," Redford said more gently this time. "But you've put her in the middle of one." Holden's voice dropped. "No. The fight came to us." Inside, the air felt heavier, like something ancient had entered the room and sat down at the table. Lily paced the kitchen floor, while Holden stood silent, thinking. "They won't wait long," she said. "If they're not given orders soon, they'll act on their own. Men like that don't just sit in parked cars." Holden rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You have proof." She nodded, reached into her duffel, pulled out a small plastic case sealed in duct tape, a military USB drive, marked with red. "This has everything. Communications logs, strike footage, memos, enough to open a full investigation if it gets into the right hands. And you think handing it over to them will solve that?" "No, that's why I need to reach someone else. A journalist, a federal liaison, somebody who hasn't been bought or silenced." Holden met her eyes. They were steady now. No fear, only resolve. "So let's get you there," he said. You'd help me run. I'd help you finish what you started. That's not running. That's standing your ground from a different place. She looked down, then back at him. You don't even know me. Holden offered a faint, tired smile. I know ghosts when I see them. And I know they don't knock unless they want to be seen. Outside, the SUVs remained still. But something had changed. Inside one of the vehicles, a soldier tapped his earpiece and spoke quietly. Then he turned to Redford. Sir, satellite shows 2 more heat signatures inside the barn, civilian and female. Redford narrowed his eyes. Then we're out of time. And with that, the clock began to tick. The last traces of sunlight bled away beyond the distant ridge, casting the barn in a bruised hue of amber and steel. Night arrived, not with peace, but with the breathless hush of something ancient, preparing to crack. Holden Cole stood in the doorway of the barn, boots planted firm, breath slow and deliberate. Lily was at his right shoulder, her expression unreadable, the same look soldiers wore when they knew the odds were about to shift against them. Ellie, though, tucked safely behind the hay bales, per his instructions, could still see everything through the slats. He hated that. Hated that she had to learn the world's weight this way. Across the dirt yard, the SUVs idled like beasts in the dark engines, low and hungry. Redford hadn't made another move. Not yet. But Holden knew how this worked. The stillness wasn't mercy, it was calculation. A silence designed to break resolve. He could feel it. The standstill was ending, and when it broke, something would be taken: freedom, maybe. Or trust. Or blood. Lily whispered beside him. We need to move. Now. They've got heat sensors on us, Holden replied. They know where we are. Running just gets us shot in the back. Then what? Her voice sharpened. You want to wait until Redford decides what part of the Constitution he wants to rewrite. Holden's jaw tensed. I want to know who's listening. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old emergency radio, the kind used by ranchers for decades, to warn of coyotes, wildfires, or mountain floods. But tonight, it wasn't the natural world that threatened them. Holden flicked the dial, crackling through empty static, until he reached Channel 3. It was faint. But there. Military bandwidth. Encrypted, but not silent. He pressed transmit. His voice was low even. This is civilian Holden Cole on private property outside Canyon Creek. I have with me Captain Lily Harlow. She is safe unarmed and in possession of data implicating multiple unauthorized strikes. I am invoking the Civilian Military Protection Clause under Emergency Code 12, requesting lawful oversight immediately. He released the button. Nothing. Just static. Then, Mr. Cole, this is Lieutenant Dana Cortez of the Federal Military Oversight Bureau. Please repeat confirmation of Captain Harlow's presence. Lily's eyes widened. They responded. Once in a while, Holden said the good guys do listen. He hit the button again. Confirmed. Captain is present and willing to cooperate under protective terms. A pause. Then, understood. We are 15 minutes out. Do not engage. Hold position. Do not surrender her to unaffiliated units. Repeat. Do not surrender. Lily let out a breath so slow it sounded like prayer. You actually believed someone out there would pick up that frequency. Holden didn't answer. He simply turned off the radio and tucked it back into his coat. Sometimes you throw a rope into the dark, he murmured, and hope someone's on the other end. But not everyone believed in ropes. Or patience. Redford stepped forward into the glow of his high beams, his face carved from years of command and consequences. He didn't shout this time. He simply walked slow and deliberate across the gravel until he was 10 feet from the barn doors. Holden opened the door wider, allowing him to see Lily beside him. It's over, Redford called out. There's nowhere else for her to go. Maybe not, Holden replied. But there's someone else coming. We radioed the bureau. Redford paused. His lips parted slightly, not shock, but annoyance. He turned his head as if expecting to see helicopters on the horizon. Nothing yet. He looked back at Holden. You think this is going to end with handshakes, with articles in the paper and congressional hearings? Wake up, Mr. Cole. The system doesn't fix what it fears. It buries it. Lily stepped forward. Then you'll have to bury me in daylight, Redford. Because I'm done hiding. The colonel's smile was razor thin. You were a good soldier once, Harlow. Obedient. Efficient. That woman's gone. No, she said. That woman woke up. Redford turned, nodded once to the man beside the SUV. The second vehicle's rear doors opened, and 3 more men stepped out. Heavily built. Tactical gear. One carried a weapon cradled low barrel down but loaded. Lily's hand inched toward her duffel bag. Holden stopped her with a single glance. We don't escalate. Not when help's coming. We don't know that. Yes, we do, he said. Because you're not the only one risking everything to tell the truth. Redford's voice cut in. Mr. Cole, you are obstructing a federal operation, harboring a fugitive. That's a minimum of 15 years, and that's assuming we let your daughter stay with relatives. That did it. Holden stepped down from the porch like a man walking into judgment. You don't talk about my daughter, then get out of the way. Not a chance. The moment snapped. Tension snapped. You could hear it a faint click as a rifle safety disengaged. And then, from the ridge behind the barn, a sudden burst of light. Headlights. A third convoy appeared, federal SUVs, marked and official. One of them bore the emblem of the Oversight Bureau. The unmistakable shape of a chopper followed behind its spotlight, sweeping across the prairie like the eye of justice suddenly waking. Redford spun toward the sound, cursing under his breath. Holden's voice carried across the field, calm and clear. You said there was nowhere else for her to go. He pointed to the ridge. Turns out she didn't have to go anywhere. She just had to stand still. Long enough for the truth to catch up. Lily stepped out beside him, shoulders square, chin lifted. And in that moment, not as a fugitive, not as a soldier, but simply as a woman who chose not to run, she waited for the storm to meet her head-on. The field behind Holden's barn lit up like a low-rising sun. Bright beams from a half-dozen Bureau SUVs swept across the prairie, piercing the shadows, reframing the night. Then came the unmistakable thump of rotor blades, a black helicopter descending over the ridge like judgment itself, wind thrashing the wheatgrass in frantic waves. Colonel Redford turned slowly, his boots grinding into the gravel, watching the federal convoy advance with the reluctant calm of a man who had hoped expected not to be interrupted. The first Bureau SUV came to a stop 10 yards from his position. Doors opened in unison, clean, efficient. Out stepped 3 agents in midnight blue jackets, each marked with the golden seal of the Federal Military Oversight Bureau. The middle figure, tall, Latina, sharp-boned, and severe, walked toward the standoff with the composure of someone who'd ended bigger confrontations with less noise. Holden recognized her voice before she spoke. "This is Lieutenant Dana Cortez," she called out. "Pursuant to Emergency Code 12 and Civilian Military Clause 88G, this site is under federal jurisdiction. Stand down." Redford didn't move. His jaw twitched. "You're late." "We're right on time," she replied. "You just didn't expect we'd show." Holden couldn't help it. A flicker of something passed through his chest. Not relief. Not yet. But something that rhymed with it. Lily, standing beside him, didn't speak. Her fingers were curled at her sides, but not shaking. Her chin was lifted just enough to say, "I'm here. I'm not running." Redford glanced back at his men. "You all hearing this?" One of them hesitated, then took half a step back. Holden watched it, saw the chain reaction begin. The way loyalty eroded when the winds shifted and the consequences grew teeth. Captain Harlow is in possession of whistleblower-level data. Cortez' continued voice amplified by the microphone clipped to her vest. She will be escorted into protective custody under oversight security. If you or any of your men interfere, you will be charged with obstruction of a federal investigation. Holden turned to Lily. Her eyes hadn't left Redford. "Is this real?" she whispered. He nodded. "Yeah. The cavalry just happens to wear quieter boots." Redford exhaled through his nose, then turned on his heel and walked toward Cortez. They met halfway across the gravel lot, like two generals in a war that no one wanted to admit was civil. Holden couldn't hear all the words, but he saw the movements. Redford speaking low and tight, Cortez responding with pointed fingers and absolute stillness. At one point he saw Redford's hands flare slightly, frustration breaking through discipline. Finally, Cortez turned back toward Lily. "Captain Harlow," she said, "you're coming with us. We'll debrief you, assess the contents of the USB, and if it holds what you claim, initiate full investigation." Lily nodded, silent. But before she moved, she turned to Holden and Ellie, both standing just outside the barn door. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Holden didn't answer right away. He looked at Ellie, who stared up at Lily with those two wise eyes, her small hand finding his. "You already did," Holden finally said. "You stayed." She smiled faintly. "You baked the bread," he chuckled. "Ellie did." Ellie beamed. "Mom's recipe." Lily crouched to the child's level. "Then I guess your mom just saved a soldier." She used to say that Ellie whispered kindness works in layers, like pie crust. Lily's throat bobbed. She was right. As Lily was escorted to the bureau vehicle, Redford stood off to the side, arms folded, jaw rigid. He hadn't been handcuffed. Not yet. Cortez had chosen to let the legal gears grind through their channels, but Holden could see it clearly. The colonel had lost something bigger than power. He'd lost control of the narrative, and men like him didn't take that lightly. Holden approached him slowly. "Was she really so dangerous?" he asked quietly. Redford didn't look at him. She was inconvenient. That's the word we use for truth. Now Redford finally met his eyes. She put blood on the record. Some of us spend our whole lives trying to keep the record clean. Holden studied him. Then he nodded once. Then maybe it was never clean to begin with. By the time the convoy pulled away, the night had returned to its usual silence. The silence that holds after something breaks, but hasn't quite fallen. Holden sat on the porch, with Ellie tucked against his side, her head resting on his chest. The rocking chair creaked in slow rhythm wind, whispering in through the cracks in the barn. "She'll be okay," Ellie said. "She will," Holden replied. "Will we see her again?" He paused. "If this world's got any decency left, I think we will." She looked up at him. "You think we helped her?" "No," Holden said, wrapping an arm around her. "I think she helped us." He looked out across the fields at the empty gravel path. The faint tire marks the last wisp of dust, trailing off into the dark. Not all wars came with bombs and fire. Some came on foot through the back fields. They whispered instead of roared. But they left marks just the same. Tonight something had shifted. Not just for Lily. Not just for Holden. But for anyone who'd ever stood between what was and what should be, and chose the harder thing anyway. Tomorrow would bring questions, reports, maybe even headlines. But tonight, Holden Cole sat on his porch, breathing in the clean air of a barn that still stood. And for now, that was enough. The next morning brought a kind of silence. Holden hadn't known in years, not the brittle silence of loss, nor the tense quiet that came before trouble, but the stillness of after. The kind that only followed a storm when the sky forgot how to shout. The barn stood whole. The porch was dusted in pine needles from the wind, and Ellie was still asleep in the room her mother had painted sunflower yellow 3 summers before her passing. Life had not returned to normal. It had moved to a different key altogether. Holden poured himself a cup of black coffee and walked out onto the porch barefoot. The breeze was cooler than usual, brushing through his long hair, as if to remind him that something had been lifted. Not erased, no, but aired out. A truth had stepped into the daylight and lived. And so had Lily. He didn't expect to hear from her. She'd been whisked off in a convoy of dark SUVs and white-lettered authority bound for D.C., or Dallas, or wherever people went when they were finally ready to speak truth at full volume. He imagined her sitting across some long table from government suits, pushing a flash drive across oak panels, and saying in that quiet voice of hers, "This is what they did. Don't look away this time." But he did hope. He hoped she remembered the barn and Ellie's pie crust wisdom, and the stew they'd shared by oil lamp light. He hoped she knew he meant it when he told her you're not alone anymore. That was the real miracle, he realized now. Not the helicopter. Not the agents. Not even the USB drive. The miracle had been a stranger knocking on his barn door, whispering not for help, but simply for bread, and giving him back something he hadn't known he'd lost. 3 days passed. Then came the letter. It wasn't mailed. It wasn't emailed. It wasn't left by courier. It was tucked gently under a jar of peach preserves left on the porch rail, same jar Lily had reached for on her first night, when she'd been too weak to even ask. The note was in her handwriting, slanted, strong. "Holden, I don't know where they'll send me next, or how long I'll be gone. But I needed you to know your kindness saved me, not just from them, from myself. You didn't ask who I'd been. You just saw who I could still be. You gave me that, and it cost you nothing but bread. And it changed everything. Tell Ellie I kept her drawing in my jacket the whole time, the one with the sun over the barn. She said it looked like home. She was right." L. Holden read it twice, then a third time, then folded it once carefully, and slid it into the old cigar box where he kept his daughter's baby bracelet and his wedding ring. The things that mattered, the things you didn't need to wear to remember. By Saturday, word had spread. Not the story. Not the one on federal files and encrypted drives. That story was still moving slowly through official channels, guarded by red tape and whispered names. But a story had started to take shape in Canyon Creek. It came from the feed store clerk, who saw black SUVs parked by the ranch. It came from the old couple at the diner, who swore they heard a helicopter and had their coffee mugs rattle on the counter. It came from the mailman, who noticed Holden's porch lights stayed on all night for 3 nights straight. And though none of them knew exactly what had happened, one thing was certain. Something changed out at the coal place. That's when the first soldier showed up. It was Sunday evening when Holden heard the knock, soft, uncertain, on the back barn door. He opened it expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe a lost traveler. Instead, it was a young man in uniform. Jacket 2 big sleeves rolled, eyes hollow like they'd seen a few too many things no one ever talked about. "Sir," the soldier said, "I don't know if I'm in the right place, but she told me this was where it started." Holden blinked. "Who, Captain Harlow?" Holden stepped aside. "Come in." By Wednesday there had been 4. 2 men, 1 woman, and a boy no older than 21, who said nothing at all, just sat on the barn's wooden floor for an hour, before finally asking if he could pet the goat. None of them asked for much, not even answers. They just sat, rested, listened. And each time before they left, they stood with Holden under the wide prairie sky, and something unspoken passed between them. A thank you, a thread. He didn't ask why they came. He just kept baking bread. One night as Holden tucked Ellie into bed, she looked up at him with a thoughtful frown. "Dad, why do you think they're coming?" he thought for a long moment. "Because sometimes the world's noise gets too loud," he said, "and people need a place that doesn't ask them to explain. Like a reset." "Yeah, like when you shut everything off and just breathe for a minute." She nodded, curling into the blanket. "I think Mom would have liked that." Holden smiled. "I think she's the reason we're able to do it." By Friday, there were 11. They didn't come in force. They came in silence, one by one. Some stayed for a meal. Some left after a cup of coffee. Some sat in the field and said nothing at all. Holden never asked. Ellie never stared. And in that space between the barn walls, under the wide-open stars, a strange, beautiful thing was happening. Healing. Not loud. Not linear. Not perfect. But real. A soldier came for bread. And somehow, 200 would follow. But Holden didn't know that yet. He only knew one thing. The barn wasn't just his anymore. It had become a lighthouse. It started at sunrise. Holden opened the barn door just after 6, expecting due silence, and maybe the smell of his sourdough starter beginning to rise in the kitchen. But what he saw made him freeze in the doorway, one hand still on the rusted latch. They were lined up. At least 24 of them, men and women, some in uniform, others in plain flannel or faded jeans, but all with the same posture. Shoulders drawn, but not rigid eyes, cautious, but not afraid. As if they had traveled miles not for shelter, but for something older, something harder to name. Peace, maybe, or the chance to stop running. Holden stepped outside slowly, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. A raven called out from the pine across the fence line, and Ellie's curtains fluttered in the upstairs window behind him. "Mornin'," he said to no one in particular, voice steady. No one answered at first. Then a tall black woman near the front nodded her jaw, firm eyes ringed with exhaustion. We heard she said simply, heard what Holden asked, that there's a man here who offers bread and doesn't ask why you need it. Holden let the silence settle. Then without a word, he stepped back and pushed the barn door wide. Then I better start the ovens. By 8, there were 57. By 10, over 100. Some came in pickups with military decals long peeled away. Some walked from the edge of town. A few arrived in rental cars, boots dusty from a day's drive. Each face was different. But the stories they carried shared the same weather, war, silence, guilt, and a weariness too heavy for any VA paperwork to hold. Holden didn't try to meet every eye. He just kept baking. Ellie worked beside him, flour up to her elbows, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth as she shaped loaves like she'd watched her mother do 100 times. They had to use the old propane oven in the shed, then the camping stoves, then a neighbor's backup grill. No one complained. The barn became a kitchen, a chapel, a place where no one asked, "What's your rank?" or "What did you do?" or "Why are you broken?" They just said, "Eat." At noon, the press came. It started with a local paper, some freelance writer named Dale, who'd caught wind of the gathering through the feed store. Then came the van from Helena, then a station out of Missoula, and then by 2 p.m., a black Suburban with tinted windows and federal plates. Cortez. She stepped out like she'd been expecting this. "You're a hard man to keep off the radar, Cole." Holden wiped his hands on a towel, handed Ellie a tray of cornbread to carry, then turned to her. Didn't plan it. They just came. Cortez scanned the line of soldiers stretching across the field, men and women leaning against the barn, sipping coffee, sitting cross-legged with goats wandering around their boots. "You know you're going to make headlines," she said. "I'm not the story." No, Cortez agreed, but this place is. She pulled a folder from under her arm and handed it to him. "For your records. The Oversight Bureau has officially closed the investigation into Harlow's whistleblowing case. She's been relocated under protected status, working internally now. High-level clearance. They believed her." Holden opened the folder. Inside, a single page. Typed. Stamped. "Allegations confirmed. Internal action initiated." He didn't smile, but something in his chest relaxed for the first time in weeks. "And her?" he asked. "She's safe. She asked me to tell you that the pie crust metaphor is now Bureau approved." Holden let out a breath, almost a laugh. "You didn't come just to say that." "No," Cortez said. "I came to ask what you want this to become, because right now you've got 127 veterans in your yard, and tomorrow you'll have twice that. You're not just a man baking bread anymore, Holden. You're becoming a movement." Holden looked out over the crowd, again saw 2 former soldiers helping rebuild the fence line, another playing checkers with Ellie in the shade. "I don't want a movement," he said. "I want a place that doesn't ask for credentials, a place that smells like cinnamon and coffee and hay." Cortez's voice softened. "And if that place starts to heal people, then I'll keep the door open." That night they camped out. Some pitched tents. Others just lay on the soft hay with their jackets for pillows. A few played quiet guitar near the barn steps. One man wept alone by the chicken coop. No one interrupted him. Holden sat by the fire pit, cup of chamomile in hand. Ellie slept on his lap, wrapped in her mother's quilt. "You never asked what I did," a voice said from behind. It was the first soldier who'd come days earlier, the one with the loose uniform and quiet eyes. "Didn't need to," Holden replied. "Don't you care?" Holden looked up at the stars, then down at the embers in the pit. "I care that you showed up hungry and stayed to help a stranger fix his fence. That tells me enough." The man said nothing for a while, then sat beside him. "I did some things, not proud of them. Then you're already ahead of the ones who did, and never thought twice. You think people like us can ever stop carrying it?" "No," Holden said softly, "but I think we can learn to share the weight." The soldier nodded, and for a while they just watched the fire breathe. By morning they had to start another dough batch, because word had spread, and the line was longer, not just for bread, but for something warmer, deeper, harder to bake. Hope. By the end of the second week they stopped counting. The line no longer ended at the gate. It curved along the gravel road and looped past the barn into the open pasture. People came from out of state. Some drove 12 hours straight. Others arrived with duffel bags slung over their shoulders and eyes that hadn't known real sleep in years. No one handed out pamphlets. There were no formal speeches, no flag-raising ceremonies, no fundraisers. Just bread, a barn, and a man with flour on his shirt who offered a place to sit and a chance to exhale. And that was somehow more than enough. They called it the bread line. Not out of mockery, but reverence. Not the kind from the history books, the kind laced with desperation and soup rations, but a new kind. One born from healing and humility. Veterans, widows, young men barely out of boot camp. Women whose medals hadn't saved them from silence. They came because someone had whispered, "There's a place where no one asks why you're broken." Some stayed for an hour, others for days. One man named Rick stayed for 2 weeks and built an entire chicken coop from old pallets and stubborn kindness. Holden didn't ask where they came from. He didn't need to. Each loaf he baked was a kind of benediction. Each bowl of stew, a reminder that sometimes the holiest things didn't happen in chapels or courtrooms, but in barns, beside strangers, with calloused hands and quiet voices. One evening, as a soft summer rain fell over the roof, Cortez returned. She stood beneath the awning of the porch in a waterproof field jacket, eyes sweeping across the yard, now dotted with tents, lanterns, and laughter. "You're building something whether you mean to or not," she said. Holden handed her a mug of coffee. I'm just trying to keep up. She took a sip, nodded. You've drawn attention. From the press. From DC. Even from some people who don't love what this place represents. Which is a reminder that maybe we failed them. Holden didn't flinch. You think you did? Cortez's voice lowered. I think we taught them to survive war, but not how to return from it. They stood in silence a moment, rain tapping gently on the tin roof. You've done more in 3 weeks than some entire agencies have done in years, she continued. People trust you. They don't trust me, Holden said, glancing toward the barn. They trust the silence here, the way no one flinches when someone cries, the way Ellie brings out pie like it's an offering. Cortez smiled faintly. She's got a calling, that kid. She got it from her mother. That night, the fire pit was larger than ever. Rick played soft guitar while 2 former medics taught Ellie how to braid rope. A woman with a cane read aloud from a battered copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, her voice trembling on certain pages, but no one minded. No one interrupted. Then, near midnight, a familiar voice cut through the darkness. You still making that sourdough cowboy? Holden turned. Lily! She stood in the mist with a duffel over one shoulder and a crooked smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Ellie dropped her marshmallow stick and ran. Aunt Lily knelt just in time for Ellie to throw herself into her arms. The little girl buried her face in Lily's shoulder and didn't let go. Holden didn't move for a long beat. He just took her in alive, whole stronger somehow. Then he stepped forward. I didn't think I'd see you again, he said. Neither did I, she replied. But they offered me a reassignment. I turned it down. Why, she looked at the barn, at the people gathered in the dark, at the windows lit from within. Because this is where the real work is. Holden swallowed the lump in his throat. Welcome home, Captain. Just Lily now, she said, smiling. The next morning, Lily baked her first batch of bread beside Holden. She laughed when the dough stuck to her hands. Ellie offered tips like a seasoned pro. Rick popped in to complain that the yeast wasn't rising fast enough and was promptly handed a mixing bowl. And just before noon, as Holden opened the barn doors for another day's guests, he found something waiting for him outside. 2 buses, painted white, marked only with a red cross and the words, Restoration Initiative Mobile Care Unit. Out stepped 2 social workers, a trauma counselor and an army psychologist. Mr. Cole, the counselor, asked. Yeah, we were told you might need support staff. Holden stared at them. You've got 100 people who think this place is sacred, she continued. You're doing holy work out here. We just want to help. Holden looked back at the field, at soldiers helping plant tomatoes, at Lily chasing Ellie with a bucket of water, at 3 men building a bench together out of scrap lumber and trust. Then he nodded. Park over by the north field, he said. And come hungry. That night, someone asked Holden what the place was. Is this a sanctuary, they said? A clinic A camp. Holden thought for a long time. Then he smiled. It's a barn, he said, with a kitchen, a fire pit, and enough grace to go around. The man nodded. Feels like church. It's not, Holden said. But maybe it's what church should feel like. And in the quiet that followed as the stars blinked awake and the bread cooled on the window ledge, Holden felt something settle deep in his chest. Not pride, not burden, but peace. He didn't need to save anyone. He just needed to keep the door open. And the fire lit. Autumn arrived quietly at the Cole farm. The leaves didn't blaze with color. They glowed like amber soaked in memory. The Montana air had turned crisp, whispering through the grass and nudging Holden's collar higher as he stood at the fence line, watching the field stretch out in every direction like open arms. There were no more lines, because no one waited anymore. They simply came. Some for a night, some to stay. some just long enough to eat a warm biscuit and leave behind a folded note on the kitchen table that said nothing but thank you. The barn, once a place for rusted tools and solitude, now held beds, quilts, a makeshift library, and the smell of something always baking. It was no longer just Holden's space. It belonged to them, to everyone who needed a place to land. One morning, just as Ellie was tying her boots for school, she asked a question. "Dad, do you ever wish life went back to how it was?" Holden raised an eyebrow as he poured her milk. "What do you mean just us? Quiet mornings, no strangers, no soldiers living in the barn, no reporters." He paused, then knelt beside her, his rough hand brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's a kind of quiet that comes from being alone, Elle. But there's another kind that comes when people finally stop fighting inside themselves. You know what I've learned," she shook her head. "I'd rather live in that second kind." Ellie considered that, then nodded slowly. "I like the second kind too." That same day Cortez called. She wasn't just checking in anymore. She was involved. Officially. "We've been watching what's happening out there," she said over speakerphone while Holden kneaded dough. "It's not just a refuge anymore. It's a model. The VA wants to expand the program. Quiet farms, peer-led healing. You're being asked to train others." Holden's hand stilled in the dough. "You want to franchise a barn, not the barn. The principle. A place that doesn't ask who you were, just who you want to become." He sighed, wiped flour from his hands. "And what happens when the government gets involved? Red tape, rules, forms. Then we fight to keep the soul intact," Cortez said. "We don't mass-produce miracles. We plant seeds, one farm at a time." Holden was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll think about it." Lily, meanwhile, had found her place. She wasn't just staying, she was anchoring. She ran morning stretches with the newer arrivals, helped organize supply drop-offs from neighboring towns, and even set up a small office in the back of the barn where she met with those too proud or too broken for group therapy. But more than that, she brought presence. She laughed easily now. She walked with purpose. And sometimes at night, Holden caught her standing at the edge of the porch, her silhouette outlined against the stars, whispering something he never asked to hear. Once she turned and caught him looking. "I used to pray for silence," she said. "Now I just hope for the strength to carry the noise with someone." "You're not carrying it alone anymore," he said. She smiled. "No, I'm not." On Thanksgiving morning, something unexpected happened. The barn was already buzzing, pies in the oven, volunteers from town bringing blankets and firewood, when a battered pickup pulled into the driveway. The man who stepped out wore an old army jacket. His hair was silver, his movements slow, but his eyes still held a fight. Holden stepped forward. "Can I help you?" The man looked around, at the barn, at the laughter spilling out from the kitchen window, at Ellie chasing a dog in the leaves. "No," he said softly. I think you already did." Holden furrowed his brow. "I'm the father," the man said, "of one of the men Lily named in her report. I served too. Long ago. I never knew what my boy had become, until it was too late." Holden didn't speak. He just listened. "I came here," the man continued, "not for forgiveness. That ain't mine to ask. But I wanted to see the place where healing started, and to say thank you for not turning people away, even the ones like me." Holden looked him in the eye. "Sir, if you came here in peace, then you're already home." The man broke. His shoulders shook. Holden caught him before he fell. That night, the barn was full. But not loud. It was the kind of full that felt like breath, not noise. Dozens gathered around the long table, hands clasped, before pie and cornbread and laughter. And before Holden carved the first slice of turkey, Ellie stood up on a hay bale and raised her voice. "I want to say something." The crowd hushed. "When my mom died, I thought it was just going to be me and Dad forever, and I was okay with that. But then one day, a soldier knocked on our door, and she didn't ask for anything big, just bread." She paused, looking over at Lily. But what she really asked for was hope. The room was silent. Now we have more people than chairs, more names than we can remember. But we remember the stories. And I think, if Mom was still here, she'd say this is the best kind of crowded. There wasn't a dry eye in the barn. Later that night, after the candles had burned low and the laughter had faded to murmurs, Holden stood at the edge of the field. Lily came to stand beside him, hands deep in her coat pockets. "Do you still think you're just a man with a barn?" she asked. He thought for a long time, then nodded. "Yeah, but now I know. A barn's enough." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You gave them bread," she whispered. Holden looked out over the dark hills, the golden lights flickering through the window panes, and they gave it meaning. Years later, a weathered plaque would hang by the barn door. Visitors would run their fingers over the words: soldiers, teachers, strangers, survivors. It would read, "Here no one asked what broke you, only if you were hungry, and we fed you with bread and belonging." The barn that never closed. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear where in the world our community is tuning in. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And let's build a circle of hope that stretches across the map. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of kindness, quiet strength, and the everyday miracles that bring us closer together. Thank you truly for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate what a single act of compassion can become.